Tory's really introduced herself to us all, hasn't she? And gained a place in our hearts already. One of the terrible things about Scientology, apart from it being stupid, is that you have these things, it's like we're talking about children. One of the things that should be mentioned is the barley formula. That Hubbard decided that mother's milk was no good, being an expert on all things. And so he invented something using corn syrup. It's like we hear so much about the dangers now of high fructose corn syrup, but, Ron got into this. And babies can be given this completely worthless formula. I remember a mother of two small children telling me that one of her children lost all of his teeth at the age of 4 because they turned black, because instead of giving mother's milk, which is the most phenomenally nutritious thing there can ever be for a human being, oddly enough, with antibodies and all sorts of wonderful things in it, you give them sugar. But then, of course, it's worth bearing in mind that Hubbard's teeth rotted in his head, as Jesse reminded us. So he may not be the best exemplar of an expert on nutrition, or indeed on childcare, or on marriage, or on, anything other than hypnosis, actually, coming to think about it. That's the only thing he seems to have excelled at. He certainly wasn't very good at music. I remember a friend of mine talking about the Power of Source album, which was his first foray into musical. And this guy was a professional musician, and he called it the Puss album. And then we got to the Road to Freedom, which was, a friend of mine said to Chick... In 1984, a friend of mine said to Chick Corea, Hubbard's dead, he's gone. And Chick said, no, he isn't. The guy said, Hubbard's dead, he's gone. He said, no, he isn't. I said, well, how do you know that? And he pulled a cassette out of his pocket and said, because I got this from him today. And he took 2 years of Chick Corea's life. Chick Corea is a phenomenal piano player, I think, just an amazing piano player. Though I also feel a lot of his music is rather anodyne. It's kind of, yes, let's be uptone, which, I think you need a range of emotion in music, personally. But he wasted 2 years of Chick Corea's life creating, thank you for listening, I write just for you. And anyway, enough of me. Tory Christman.
The barley formula to me.
Medical benefits of Scientology.
There you go, the medical benefits. Now, the medical abuses of Scientology is what I'm speaking about. My name's Tory Christman, for anyone who might just be plugging in on this, because it's being filmed. So I want to make sure, I'm going to make a couple of points that I already made before to each of you, but just in case somebody new is watching it. When I got in 1969. In 1969, there was no internet, and for most of us that were in, there was no internet until probably 2000 or on. So we didn't have the access to type in Google and find out about L. Ron Hubbard or the abuses or anything else. So that's number one. Number two is that Scientology is a very insulated and insular group. That's why I call it the Scientology Truman Show. If you haven't seen The Truman Show, I highly recommend you rent it and watch it. And even if you've seen it, after this convention, rent it and watch it again, because it's kind of amazing to watch it when you have all of this new information. Anyway, the third thing is that there is definitely mind control, which Steve Hassan thankfully talked to us about. And if you haven't gotten his book, I really recommend getting it, because it really does break down cults and how they work and how mind control works. It's so tricky. There's another really good book called Captive Hearts, Captive Minds, which also breaks down. But, education in itself really helps. Okay, so for me, I'm just going to give you a little bit of background so that you understand why everything fell in place the way it did. I got epilepsy at 18. I had a grand mal seizure. Is everybody in here, know what a grand mal seizure is? Yeah. Okay, so my mother totally freaked out. I'm put on some medication, it totally stabilizes me, I'm fine. So now I go to college, I quit college, and I go to New York. I decide I want to be a hippie, so I moved to San Francisco because I'm looking for more, right? And with a number of other million people that went to, were looking for more in the 60s. And I became part of the drugs, rock and roll, peace, make love, not war. And we did a lot of all those things. And drugs are a tricky thing because once you get into them, and even though I was just doing like social drugs, but it was like, hey man, try this, okay, And so we were trying different drugs, and it got darker and darker. And finally I got really sick, and someone reported it to my parents, and my parents flew me home, and now I'm in the hospital in Lake Forest. And I forgot to tell you, I grew up in Park Ridge, which is a really nice suburb of Chicago. And then my parents decided to build their dream house in Lake Forest, which is a very wealthy, and I felt exclusive, and I wasn't very happy there. So now I'm back in Lake Forest in the hospital, and people are coming in going, oh, what a shame, Tory Christman, you were doing drugs. And so I'm kind of just thinking, I don't want to talk to these people. And finally, these two young guys come in, and they're like really nice. And so finally I said, well, what do you do? And they said, we're Scientologists. And just like if you've ever seen the Dianetic ad with the volcano, that's how I felt. It was like, Scientology, what is that? And they said, well, and I had been studying Eastern religions, and I had a hard time applying them, because it's sort of like love your neighbor, and I'd get ticked off and be like, I don't love that person. So I said, well, what is Scientology? And they said, it's an applied philosophy. And a lot of people who got in back then, if they'd said it was a religion, we wouldn't have gotten in. But they said it was either a science or an applied philosophy, and there were tools that this guy had done. So I said, okay. And they said, here, you can have this book. And I said, really? And they said, yeah, take it. Now, one thing that a lot of cult experts point out is that people don't join cults. Cults find you. And that's exactly what happened there. So I read 3 chapters, and my grandfather was a doctor, and I always wanted to be a doctor. But after being in college, I thought, I'm not going to go to medical school and all this. It's too hard. And as an auditor in Scientology, you can clear people, right? It sounded as good as being a doctor to me. So I had a fight with my dad. I went into college again in Lake Forest College, had an argument with my dad, and he said, go to bed. And I said, Dad, it's 10:30 at night, and I'm a night owl. We've been arguing about this forever. He said, go to bed. So I said, okay. So I pulled down my shade, because he said, it's our morals or no school. So I pulled down my shade, and I wrote, your morals or no school, screw you. And I hitchhiked from Chicago to Los Angeles, because at the back of the Dianetics book it said St. Hill, England, or American St. Hill. So I'm on my way. I get there. Anybody in here read the book Blink? Great. If you haven't, it's a wonderful book. It talks about your very first instincts are often the exact correct ones. And there's some great scientific examples about it in it. It's a really good book. But my first instinct, I looked at it later, was I walked up and I thought, okay, I've just been picketing against a war for 2 years. These guys are in Navy uniforms. It's super organized. They look like robots. And L. Ron Hubbard had these gigantic pictures all around American St. Hill. And I thought he looks kind of like Hitler. Not like physically, but just having all these big pictures up around him. I should have left right then. But my friends had said, go ask for this guy, John, he's on the big horse. So I walk in and I say, okay, I want to talk to John, he's on the big horse. And they said, you can't. He's on course, you can talk to him at 10:30 at night. And so I said, oh, okay. So I hitchhiked back out to the valley, we get stoned, we're like, oh yeah, right, he's gonna call you. Because hippies never do anything, they get stoned and they forget they're gonna do anything. And so we're like goofing around laughing, and at 10:35, the phone rings. And it's the guy. And I go, it's the guy. And I said, no. So, hello? And he says, I'll be out in 15 minutes. And I said, okay. And we get stoned again. We're like, yeah, he's going to drive out to see you, sure. And he did. And it really, the reason I'm mentioning this is it shows how much just something like following up on something can majorly change someone's life. I mean, had he not done that, I would have never gotten into Scientology, which, you know, that can happen both ways as far as getting people out too. But anyway, long story short, he comes back, drives me up to American St. Hill, goes back there. Back then, there were like 200 people outside after course. There were tons of people in Scientology in the end of the 60s, early 70s, yes?
Was that the same guy who had gone to the hospital and given his book?
No, it was a friend of his. Remember the kids said, ask for John. It's a different John, yeah. But I'm still in touch with that guy. Okay, so now, where was I? Okay, right. And so he says, so I say, I have all these questions because it doesn't seem like what I want to do. So he says, well, let me get a 6-pack of beer at Henry's liquor store. And I thought, well, he can't be all bad. He drinks beer, right? So we sit and he's having a beer and we're talking and I get to ask him my questions and he's like, don't worry about their uniforms, that's the Sea Org, and all those pictures, that's Hubbard. Let's go meet the auditors, that's what you want to do. And we go meet the auditors and they all have these, terms they're talking about and they look so cool and they were very smart. There were a lot of smart people back in that day that were in Scientology. And I was like, I like this. And I remember the second I turned off my critical thinking and thought, I don't care what these people do, I want to be one of them. So that was really it. I get on course. Now they get with me and say, you know what? We've decided you're able enough to be in the Sea Organization. So we want you to join the Sea Org. And I'm like, okay. So now I pack my bags, I'm off to the Sea Org, I'm on a ship. And remember, I have epilepsy, so I take medicine for it. And I run out of my medication. And I say, I need to get a refill of my medication. And the guy says, you have to go see the MLO, the medical liaison officer. And I'm like, okay, my faith is in these people. I think they know what they're doing, right? I'm totally trusting them. So I go down to this guy, he's probably 18 at the most, not medically trained. And he says, well, we're the Sea Org, and we're the top 10% of the planet, and none of us take medication. So, but don't worry, we're gonna put you on a program to get you off your medication. And I'm like, okay. So now I'm having grand mal seizure after grand mal seizure, day after day. And I'm getting worse and worse, which you can hear when I talk. I'll forget, because I'm losing my short-term memory. And my mother's in Chicago and starts calling me, going, Tory, get on your medication. And I'm like, no, Mom, Dianetics is gonna fix it. Don't worry about it. And she's like, no, Dianetics is not gonna fix it. And I'm having more seizures. Every time I come out of them, the Scientologists are there going, well, you must be low responsibility. I'm on the ground. And they're like, you must be low responsibility or potential trouble source, which means I'm connected to an SP. So we decide my mother's the SP. Anyway, it's a huge mess for me. Finally, I have a seizure in the bathtub and knock out my front teeth. And my mother starts staying on top of it, which to any parent, I can't say it enough. If you have children and you think they're in a cult, stay on top of it. Because my mother and I were not close, but she stayed on top of it. She saved my life. She called me one night. She said, what are you doing? And I said, I'm going out on a date. She said, okay, I'll call you tomorrow. She called me the next day. She said, how was your date? I said, what date? She said, okay, that's it. Either you are on your medication today, and your doctor calls me today in Chicago and says you are on your medication by this afternoon, or I'm going to personally fly out to Los Angeles and trust me on this, Tory, L. Ron Hubbard and the Church of Scientology will never forget your mother. And I knew my mom. My dad was a broadcaster on NBC. And I knew they had media communication lines. She would have been everywhere telling parents, don't let your kids get into Scientology. But I didn't want to have seizures anyway, so I was like, great, I can't do your program, I have to take the medication. But that's why people ask me all the time, well, when did you wake up? How did you wake up? And I really started then, because Scientology has the bridge to total freedom, and it's a step-by-step thing to get free. That's what they say. Whether you're staff, Sea Org, public, it's a specific bridge to total freedom. And I, taking medication, realized I had to be on the bridge next to the bridge to total freedom. So I wasn't really on the bridge, but next to it. So then I continued on for years trying to, because L. Ron Hubbard wrote me a letter and said, you need to handle epilepsy and we'll see you up the line. So I couldn't get back in the Sea Org until I handled epilepsy. So originally I got in to handle auditing, and now I'm on this thing where I have to handle myself, right? Which is impossible because it's a physical condition, like my mom said. And another person with epilepsy is dead. They totally followed their instructions, got off the medicine. So now it's in the, Scientology, like I told you guys, it's like a triangle, right? And my husband's OT8. I'm on OT7 for 7 years. It doesn't work, so I start reading self-improvement books, which if you're in and you're knowing things are not going well, I highly recommend going to a bookstore and look in the self-improvement section. There's a lot of great books that are much cheaper than Scientology. And if you're thinking of joining Scientology in some way you want help, I cannot say it enough, go to the library, go to the bookstore, study and learn, or go to college, go to school, do anything but joining a cult, because once you get in, it's very, very hard to get out. Now, I finally ended up, 1989, my mother-in-law paid for OT 4, 5, 6, and 7 for my husband and I. That's $200,000. That's our inheritance. She said, I'm gonna give it to Flag because I wanna see your wins. She was a Scientologist from 1950 and my husband's father. So, there goes that, right? So now, in a way, we're like, okay, well, it's paid for, that's great. But in another way, it's not great, because now we're really in the show, right? We're in the top end of it. So you have to do a routing form to actually get onto it. So I'm on my routing form, I get to a 15-year-old kid. He's the MAA, the ethics officer. And he opens up my folder and he goes like this. You are not allowed on the Flag land base. And I knew it had to do with epilepsy and my medicine, right? It had to. So I did the De Niro thing of taxi driver, and I went like this. Are you talking to me? Are you talking to me? And I just kept doing that until he finally didn't know what to do. And I said, you better find someone who does. And once I found someone who did, she said, I want to let you know, we've checked out everything that's happened to you. And all of your earlier handlings of epilepsy have been suppressive, and we're going to fix it. So I'm like, finally, right? So I start going around doing my little setups to get onto this OT4, and I run into my dear friend who I mentioned earlier, Bill Yachty, who's my auditor now. Now he's going to be my auditor. And he starts sec checking me, which they're saying, asking about, what did you do? Did you steal any materials? Are you in touch with suppressive people? All of this. And nothing's happening. So finally he sets the cans in front of me one day and he says, today we're gonna sec check epilepsy. And I said, Bill, you and the CS can sec check epilepsy. I'm done. You show me in writing where it says from L. Ron Hubbard that I can't take my medication for epilepsy. And he brings some stuff over and I said, it doesn't say that. And he brings another thing over and I said, it doesn't say that. So it finally, and a lot of you, how many people in here are Scientologists? Were. Okay, and how many were OTs? Okay, so, you know that it used to be OT1 through OT7, right? But now it isn't. But this is 1989, and they said OT8 is the first OT level now. All the rest are pre-OT levels. That's how they have it. So I'm thinking, they're showing me this piece of paper. First of all, I knew tons of OT7s who were talking about, I healed this with OT7 and I healed that. All a bunch of bullshit for anybody thinking maybe it did. But I believed it. And it isn't what it isn't what you think it is. You know what I mean? And so you're thinking, okay, this is going to fix it, but it doesn't. And it doesn't. It just doesn't work. And now I forgot where I was again. I'm sorry.
OT7, OT8.
Oh yeah, the pre-OT levels. Okay, and what's the reference? And so the reference by L. Ron Hubbard said, on upper OT levels, someone should not be on medication. So I said to this top dog at Flag, I think you have misunderstood on what Hubbard's talking about. And I want my folders to go up to Ray Midoff, who's now locked in the hole or has been for years. But at the time, he was the senior CS. And I knew him personally. And I said, I want my folders to go up to him and let him decide. And they came back, they corrected the entire Flag land base, everyone who was on the tech team, for all of these misunderstandings about medicine. But it's so bad, and the reason I wanted to talk about it, I knew when I left Scientology, I finally woke up in 2000 and escaped out, and I knew 4 kids who'd killed themselves, including my son's best friend. I knew him personally. Now I know 12. And so I really want to say to anyone, if you're in the Church of Scientology, if you have a physical condition, the tech is not going to fix it. It just isn't. And you need to get to a real doctor, not a Scientology doctor, and make sure that you're doing what they say. And if you're a kid, because most of the kids that killed themselves were like in their 20s, and you feel like there's nowhere that you can go, there is. You need to walk to the nearest door and walk out. Because that's really all that needs to happen for you to get out. And there are people out here that will help you. And my last thing I'm going to tell you is just a couple of funny stories. There were these guys, I picket all the time out in front of the church and stuff like that. And so one time I'm picketing and I've got a sign, honk if you think Scientology's a cult. And everyone's honking, right? They're the UPS guy's honking. Their mailman is honking. People are walking by going honk, 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 honk. I mean, it was just unbelievable. And so I finally see this one black guy. He's kind of standing there. He looks kind of bummed out. And I said, "What's up?" And he goes, "My friend just joined that." And I said, "What, the Sea Org?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "Do you think he really wants to?" And he said, "No, I think he wanted dinner." So I said, "All right. Tell you what, you go tell him you want to talk to your friend for 5 minutes and get him out here." He goes, "Okay." So the guy comes out and I said, "Do you really want to join this thing? It's like a slave camp, basically." And he goes, "No, I want a dinner." And I said, "Okay, here's the deal." He goes, "But I signed that contract, so I've got to stay." I said, "No, you don't. It's an illegal contract. So we're going to make a line." There were about 10 of us. I said, "We're going to make a line across the sidewalk so they can't get you. And you haul ass down the street and don't come back," right? So they do. They go running down the street. "Thank you so much." So that was one. And another one was 2 other ones that I just wanted to tell you were, one was a young guy, again, a black young man, and he's standing there looking kind of bummed out, a different location. And I said, "What's going on?" And he goes, "I'm thinking about joining these guys." And I said, "I can tell from the color of your skin that you probably genetically have some people that they were in slave camps. They didn't have a choice." And he goes, "Yeah." And I said, "Exactly. That's what this is. You want to join it?" And he goes, "Not really." And I said, "Well, what do you want to do?" And he said, "I want to go to college." And I said, "Good, then get the hell out of here and don't come back. You can see these white chicks from Scientology. They're bad news, right?" So he hauls ass, so that was good. And then the third one was, I'm out there with my honk if you think Scientology is a cult, and this guy pulls over and he goes, "I just have to ask you something." And I said, "Yeah?" And he goes, "I'm about to drive over to Celebrity Center and give them my entire inheritance. Is there something that I need to know?" I said, "Why don't you park your car?" So anyway, I could go on and on, but that's basically it. I hope you learned something from it. Thank you for listening. Do you have any questions or anything before I walk off?
So questions?
I'm going to go with him.
Are you still on?
Dilantin. Yes, ma'am.
Good for you, Tory.
And while I was in Scientology, there were really only 5 people I could say the word epilepsy to, because they treat you like a degraded being. It's really awful.
Hey, Tory, it's Nora.
Hi, Nora.
I just want to say, when I was on the RPF in 2000 and you were starting to protest outside of the HGB, I'm happy to meet you here now in person. I've seen a lot of your videos and everything, but when that started and I was on the RPF, you were like our #1 problem. I just wanted you to know you really were creating an effect because...
Thank you.
When we were being transported down Hollywood Boulevard, they would actually, at one point they started taking a detour because they didn't want the RPFers to see your signs because, you know, we might discover there was something outside of the, not only the Sea Org enslavement, but the enslavement of the enslavement, you know, kind of a situation because we were working on the Able building at the time. And every time we would drive by, we were told to look out the other window at something. They would say, oh, look, it's the Help building over there. Remember those guys? And we'd be like, what? And then it was like, drive really quick by Tory. So I just wanted you to know, thank you for everything you're doing out there, you know, in the dredges of Hollywood, because it is working.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, Jerry? You are Jerry, right?
Yes. Tory, you mentioned receiving a letter from L. Ron Hubbard regarding your epilepsy. Do you know what year that was?
I think it was 1972.
Okay. You probably have been told this before.
I know he never wrote the letters.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know
it's just
that.
another way that you were conned.
Yeah.
So.
I know. It's a lot of manipulation. Scientology does that all the time. But how would you, I know, you know, when you're in, you think it's really from L. Ron Hubbard.
Right, we all did.
Yeah. But I talked to Laurel Sullivan, a little different, but the same party. Someone told me what you just said. And also I worked in PR with OSA, and I was pretty successful with it. And so I asked Laurel, I said, I don't get it, you know, because I was pretty successful with OSA, and OSA was not. They were always like, what are your crimes, what are your overts? And I never did that. And she said, and let me ask you this, you were never trained in L. Ron Hubbard's PR tech, were you? And I said, no, I wasn't. My dad was in the, you know, he's a media for NBC, and my mom was a journalist, so I kind of grew up in a PR family. And she goes, we who were trained in L. Ron Hubbard's PR tech were kicked out of every single port we were in the world. That's Laurel.
Okay, Ron
Yeah.
has a question. What time are we supposed to show the video? Who's running that?
I'm gonna be pushing play right here.
Okay, and we should get, how long is the video, do you know?
It's over an hour, so.
Well, we're not watching an
Yeah,
hour.
we're not gonna watch it the entire thing.
Oh, we're watching 13 minutes. Okay, well, here's Ron. with a
13
question.
Oh, it is 13 minutes.
Hi, Steve.
Oh, it's 13 minutes, sorry about that. See,
Hi, Tory.
Where are you? Okay, thank you.
From my perspective at the other end of the bridge, a lot of the OT levels seemed rather ambiguous in their outcome until you hit OT8. OT8 sounded like you had control over the universe.
Right.
You were married to an OT8, and of course you didn't see any control of the universe. So what were you thinking?
You know, it's a good question. You aren't thinking when you're in Scientology. That's one of the things that get you. Thinking is at the bottom of the no to mystery scale, right? That's one of Hubbard's scales. And thinking is like way down here. And knowingness is way up here. So you're not really thinking, first of all. Secondly, they keep come on, hurry up. It's a Hill 10. We got to get this handled right now. So everybody's like scrambling around all the time. And that's probably true for every cult, right? Steve, you know, you've got to keep moving, you got to keep going, so you don't have time to think. Thirdly, you have the peer pressure of all these people saying, Tory, oh, this was the thing I wanted to mention, because people ask me all the time, how could you believe in OT3? And here's what happened to me, because now they have a big, long course kind of walking you into it, but back then they just handed you the folder with us 75 million years ago, you know, and I can't tell you. I sat down, I said, you gotta be fucking kidding me. This is OT3? But here's the take. I have epilepsy. Neurologists don't know what causes epilepsy. So I thought, maybe it's these body thetans that are all over me. that are making me have these seizures. And then it made perfect sense. So when I was on OT3, I had horrendously fantastic wins. And people on much higher levels were saying to me, I've never seen anybody have wins like you're having on OT3. But that's because I thought I was handling epilepsy. Now, this was the thing I forgot to tell you in my story. Okay, I finished OT3, I had tests. Now I'm done, all the BTs and clusters are gone, right? Cool. So now, why do I need to take the medication, right? I don't have any BTs or clusters, and they're what caused it, I'm sure. Nobody said that. Do you see what I mean? It's just you can plug in your own insanities to this tech that's totally insane. So now I try to get off my medicine, and I start going into these really fast seizures, right? And I don't know how, I mean, I do believe in higher powers. I know there's a lot of atheists and things, but I do. And they've helped me a lot. And this was a subconscious thought. I didn't consciously think it, but subconsciously I knew this guy Jerry, and I knew he was on the fence, and I knew he'd get me right to the first hospital, which was a couple of blocks away, Morton Plant Hospital, which if Lisa McPherson had gone there, she would maybe be alive today. So I thought, don't call Scientologists, because they would have taken me out where they took Lisa. And you know what the doctor said? 5 more minutes, and you would have been dead. I was in the middle of status epilepticus, which means seizure after seizure after seizure. So Jerry Hall, if you ever hear this or see it, thank you, God bless you. And I can't thank all of you enough, everyone around the world, all my friends. I mean, you just never know how much you're helping someone. But you guys, you really are helping. All of you that are here. Spanky.
Tory, because he asked about your husband.
Hey, Spanky, let's give you the microphone. You'll have the last comment.
What did he ask?
No. Spanky's going to say something, and then okay, these 2 pretty women here.
You never say no to a pretty lady.
Oh, the OT8 thing.
He asked about your
Okay, thank you.
And I wanted you to explain what his expectation was, and all of ours, because he was
Okay, thank you for reminding me. First of all, you don't talk about it, right? So now in Scientology, they used to have the bridge to total freedom, and they had the end phenomena for everything. And OT7, I think it was cause over matter, energy, space, and time. Okay, OT8. But they don't have anything now. It's just all blank. There's nothing written. Nothing. So you just have to figure it out, right? So all of my friends were OT7s and 8s, and we were all so screwed up. And my husband, the higher up you get, David Miscavige at an event said the reason why the Berlin Wall went down is because we released OT8. So you can imagine people, it isn't that I'm sure OT8 in itself was awful, but what was worse was the expectations of all these people underneath you going, really, you have to use your hands to drive a car? I thought you were OT8. True story. Really, you use a pen you have to like write out to pay a check? I thought you were OT8. I mean, and after a while, my husband was like, I don't want to go out. I don't want to see anybody. Because it's too awful. And for me, he did. When he went into OT7, he'd come out and he'd look really bright and cheery. I never did. I knew it never worked. It never worked for me. The only thing I said is I went off this level. I was 100 pounds overweight on OT7. I would write up to Miscavige and say, this level is not working, man. Let me off of it. And I would get back, okay, continue. That was it. And they wouldn't let me off. And finally, Miscavige had an event and said, the reason why the OT7s are so screwed up is because we trained him wrong. First of all, thank you very much for having the privacy to talk to us privately. He says at this huge event. Then we're all routed to the reg to pay $25,000 to redo the course that he just announced they trained us wrong in. That was the real night I left. And I left 1997, I quit auditing, and they said, see if you can walk down the street and not think about your case. That's like, don't think about an elephant, right? It's like, boom. I got to the second driveway, I stood out in the street and went like this. And I just cut all the lines to whatever BTs and clusters were there, and I said, you can go to South Africa, go to Brazil, but get the hell out of here. I am never, never going to try to do this again. Not this lifetime, not next lifetime, not the lifetime after. I am done. So that's why by the time I left, people said, you were just so together by the time you left. But that's because I'd spent 10 years trying to handle things with self-improvement. And I believe, just like Chris, I don't regret it. I don't. And you can see I had a hard time with it. But it's like it all brought me to this place, and I've been able to help tons of people get out and not join. Yes?
Yeah, hi, Tory. Thank you. I wanted to mention something about the SO1 letters that you talked about. They are written by the broad Scientology public. They were written to LRH. When all else failed, LRH said, you can write to me and use this one line, and if you put SO1 on it, it'll be routed to the ship or to St. Hill when he was still at St. Hill. To standing order number 1. Standing order number 1, that's right. And then it'll get to me and I will answer. And I just wanted to let the people know here, during the 60s and the 70s, I was Commodore Staff Aide 1. Which is in charge of all communications worldwide to and from Scientology organizations and Scientologists, and I was in charge of a few other things. The SO1 in charge on the ship would get all these letters coming in. There were baskets of them sometimes every day. They'd come on board from in whichever country we were. And the SO1, Sylvia Calhoun, would go through them, and she'd figure out, she had to answer all of them for LRH, you see. Now, Sylvia wasn't exactly the active type of individual. You know, she wasn't really like I am, you know, immersed in my work and rushing around and getting things done. So she would sort them out. Oh, this is an ethics problem. Okay, that'll go to Hannah. This is a technical problem. That'll go to Brian. This is a PR problem. It's going to go to Diana, who was the aide number 6, and so on. And once or twice a week, Sylvia would, with that glorious smile of hers, would appear in my office with 1 or 2 boxes full of SO1 letters that I personally had to answer. And each aide had that job. And so this is a little bit of truth for you.
Thank you. And one last thing with you was it was very hard for me to hear how much drugs L. Ron Hubbard was on. You know, because I was treated like a leper for taking medicine for epilepsy, and then to find out all the drugs and stuff that he did, it's just shame for Scientologists that are in. Get the hell out. Stand up. Stand up. Take a stand. I've talked to so many Scientologists that are still in the church. I don't want to lose my friends. I don't want to lose my family. Get up. Get out. If everyone stood up that feels the way you feel, it'd be over.
And one last thing I want to add, which I felt very ashamed of at the time, but also I was angry. When all these boxes of SO1 started appearing, you know, I had other work to do as well. We were in charge of the world, you know. And so I'd shove them into corners in my little office, and they'd start to pile up. You know, week by week, I had these boxes of SO1 letters. One night I got desperate. And my head was pounding. I wasn't feeling well. I was just pissed off with everything. I got my friend, CS7, who was in charge of the LRH communicator network, and I said, I need your help with something. I've got some boxes in my office and I need to throw them overboard. We were at sea. So that was perfectly okay because they were heavy enough to sink immediately. Right. So there we were, laughing our way up onto the back of the ship, the poop deck, with these boxes, several trips, And overboard they went, you know. And from that point on, I had to hide that as an overt, of course. It was a misdeed of magnitude.
Yes.
I can add something to that. In 1983, Laurel Sullivan, for 1 week, there was an L. Ron Hubbard executive directive about the Standing Order No. 1 line. And it was only available for 1 week, and I happened to have written to Ron. And so I got it. And it said, and the standing order is you can always write to Ron, all mail that is addressed. Yeah. I could have managed that. all mail addressed to me shall be received by me. You notice it doesn't say shall be replied to by me and received. There is actually a policy letter from the 60s that explains that he doesn't answer them, but it's hidden in the OEC volumes. But this L. Ron Hubbard executive directive by the L. Ron Hubbard communicator, or L. Ron Hubbard's personal public relations officer, whatever she was at the time, said, of course he doesn't answer his letters, he couldn't possibly. And the letter that I got with it from Ron was signed Ron, and above the Ron, it had got initials for the person who'd actually written it. So that was the truth of the SO No. 1 line.
Exactly.
Wow, amazing.
You want to run the video?
We've got about 5
You've got
minutes.
5 minutes left.
Jerry?
Jerry had a question again. It's not like you, Jerry.
We've got 8 minutes and 5 seconds.
8 minutes
Yeah,
and 5 seconds.
and just to add one more little tidbit, but that representation that Hubbard made, that all mail addressed to me shall be received to me, was used to effectuate service of process against him. Consequently, they changed that, and it now reads, or subsequently after that, read differently.
Right. Thank you.
Oh, that's
Not showing the video?
We will be doing. We've got 5 minutes.
One important question. I mean, you've been there Scientology for 2 decades, okay? And you've been doing all the OT levels there.
Wait, speak slower, and you guys please
Okay,
wait.
one second.
For 2 decades.
Okay.
The OT levels while you were there.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank
Now, each OT levels you come with a win, but there's mock-up or it's original, you know better than anyone else. Same time, when you're having this fake sort of win going on in your life, you're also interacting with the real world. You go to grocery store, you go to people, meet people, schools. How a Scientologists live in a common world, having a fake life of having wins, it is no real value, no superpowers, nothing. I mean, you spending money like anything. You guys spending your income, your investment, your savings, whatever you're spending. You spend something on grocery, you see the return. You say something on your real estate, you see the return. You are spending something on spiritual gain, and you're laughing away and saying and cursing yourself.
So what's the question?
So the question is that how you live with a real life. I mean, what was it, like a pessimism or some sort of guilt conscious where you're living all those decades?
Okay, as I said in the beginning, it's mind control. They have no access. Even right now with the internet, most Scientologists do not, they won't Google the facts that all the conversations we've had here in the last few days, they don't know about. They don't know this information. If they do, it goes into this closet. I called it like I didn't call it at the time. You don't know it, you're not aware of it. That's how mind control works. It shuts you down. You shut yourself down. It's self-censoring from the very beginning. Because remember, you cannot get free if you listen to any of this other stuff. You will never get free. And you have to remember the peer pressure. You're just thinking of you and how you would feel. It sounds, logically, it doesn't make sense at all. But it isn't logical. It's mind control. You have to go on YouTube, and anybody else who has this same thought, I suggest you go on YouTube, and as Steve said, get Steve's book, look up Zimbardo on YouTube, look up the Stanford experiment, look up what's the third one?
Buy
Milgram
my
Ash.
new book when it comes out later this year.
Yeah, type in mind control, learn about it, because it explains it.
The thing is, as I said earlier, as Korzybski said, the map is not the territory. A human being lives in the theatre of his or her own mind. We all do. We're not living in the world in reality. We're living in the theatre of our own minds. And when you've been told, when you do the next level, you will have these powers.
And you've got hundreds of people saying the next level worked for them.
And you're within a peer group that's, everybody's doing that, then, how is it that after the Anschluss in 1938, that 99% of Germans, Austrians, people, voted to give up the right to vote, to make Hitler, that's human nature, I think, is the answer. Mind control is certainly an aspect of it, but just human nature of itself.
And also hope. There's
how did people vote for George W. Bush?
Of whatever you want to get fixed will get fixed with Scientology.
It's groupthink, yeah.
Is there anyone here that can raise your hand and say you don't have anything that you want fixed? Exactly. So that's my point. They find what that is and they go, they don't say it will help. They don't say it will get fixed. They say there's a chance. But see, it also depends on how ethical you are. If you're out ethics, it might not work for you. If you're PTS, if you're connected to someone like me, it probably won't work for you. Or all of you now, because you're suppressive too. Thank you. Is it okay?
I'm going to have to watch the film because I had to go off and do something. I'm so sorry. Lawrence Wallersheim spent 15 years in court. Is that right, Jerry? 15? More than that, probably. 79? Yeah, all the way. So that's 23 years in court. 8.7 million dollars was finally awarded to him. He, I think, remains the only person to have won a judgment in the US of such magnitude.
A financial judgment.
Yep, a financial judgment. Most of it went to the lawyers. He doesn't have any money left. But he was a founder with Bob Penny of FactNet. And he is just the most remarkably persistent human being, and he's given us this piece of original video which has never been seen before.